All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We may still have some more people joining, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and start. My name's Lauren Kaiser. I will be your host for the meeting this morning, and Dwayne Adams is my co-host. So thank you again for joining. Today we're going to be talking about different tools for meeting management and also how you can join meetings from a secondary device, and also some best practices for creating a secure meeting. So specifically, some of the things we'll be looking at will include the chat tool. So we'll show you some different options for that, and we'll show you how to enable that and adjust some of your settings and how to use it. The chat tool does show up on your Zoom controls on the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to utilize that during our call today. As you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat. Please make sure your message is going to everyone and not privately to me, because I will be sharing my screen, so I won't see those chat messages. Dwayne might be able to answer some of your questions in the meantime, so you can submit them to chat. We'll also pause periodically for questions throughout. We're also going to be talking about how you can customize your meeting settings for better user management. And a lot of those settings will also include security tips. So different things like authenticated users, waiting rooms, and some different things like that. We'll also talk about your view options. So how you can do things like spotlight a particular participant, or pin a video, or move your windows around to better see the people on your call. And then the last thing we'll talk about today is how you can join from a second device. And then of course we'll end a few minutes early so that we have more time for questions. But again, we'll also take questions throughout as we switch topics. All right, so chat. We have two different parts of chat that we'll talk about, but the first one is just making sure that you have chat enabled. So if you don't even see chat, maybe you've done some Zoom meetings and you don't see chat at all as an option ever, it's not even listed on your screen, it's possible that you don't have that feature enabled. So that's going to be one of your primary settings. And to get to those settings, you'll want to visit tcu.zoom.us. That's our web portal. And you'll want to go into settings. And one of the first things you'll see is what we see over here on the left-hand side of my screen for chat. So this first option is just to turn on chat to allow that to be a feature. But then you also have some additional options. So I do want to let you know about a few of those. One of them that shows up is private chat. And this is actually a setting that's been added. It's been there for a while now, but if you started using Zoom maybe back in March and you haven't looked at any of your settings then, it's a good idea to check this out and see if anything's changed. But this option here is for private chat. So here's where you get to decide if you want participants to be able to message one another privately. So allow meeting participants to send one-on-one messages to another. Up to you if you're going to want that. It has been turned off by default as a security measure so that there aren't, any sort of inappropriate private messages being sent that you wouldn't be aware of. So as participants, you can send a message to everyone, or you can send a message to the host. And you guys, if you want to see what that looks like on your screen, you're more than welcome to hit that chat button on the bottom, and you'll see by default it'll go to everyone, but you can also send a private message to me. Again, for the sake of me being able to see it and actually answering your questions right now, please send it to everyone, because I won't see those private chat messages because I can't see that screen right now. But that is what that setting is. Again, up to you if you want to allow that or not, but it is turned off by default now as a security feature. So people cannot send private messages. They can only send messages to everyone or to the host. Another option you have is if you want to automatically save the chats. So by default, again, the chats don't save. So if you have chats going during the meeting and then you end the meeting, the chat's gone. If you want to be saving those chats, though, you can turn that feature on to automatically save them. Or when we switch gears a little bit, I'll show you how you can manually save a chat if maybe there's one in particular you want to save, but you don't need to save your chats for every single call. So those are just a couple of settings related to chat. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have a picture of the actual chat window from your Zoom controls. So when you're looking at your screen, you're looking at your actual Zoom controls, you'll see a button across the bottom that says chat. And when you click on chat, you'll see a box like this white box pop up right above it. Again, by default, it says to everyone, and you can type your message there and it'll go to everyone in the chat. So again, we'll encourage you to use that feature if you do have questions throughout the call. When we do pause for questions, you can of course unmute yourself and ask as well. But if you have a question that you want answered right away, you can add it in the chat. Like I mentioned, you don't have to automatically save every chat. So if there is a certain session that you want to save, you'll see three white, or not, the dots aren't white, the box is white. You'll see a white box with three gray dots, and you can click on that and you'll have the option to save the chat that way. Your chats are saved to whatever location you have designated for your recordings to be stored at. So that's where your chats are going to save to. All right, moving on from chat. We're actually going to come back to this. We're going to talk about how to admit participants if you're using a waiting room. So we'll circle back to that when we get to that waiting room feature. So before we move on to some of our live demonstration and how to do different things, I do want to make sure that we're all familiar with how to get support. So IT support is responsible for Zoom. So if you are having any trouble with Zoom, you can definitely contact the IT support help desk. We have their different contact methods listed down below. You can do a phone call, a chat, or self-service tickets. If you are in a classroom, if you're teaching on campus this semester and you're in a classroom and you're having an issue with the equipment in there, can't get something to work, you can give our instructional support team a call. Their extension is 7121. If you just want to further your learning with Zoom, you have some additional questions and things like that, support.zoom.us, they have several great help articles. They're very detailed, but easy to follow at the same time. They have pictures. So I definitely recommend taking a look at their support articles if you have questions about a specific feature. And then last but not least, our web portal for Zoom, it's tcu.zoom.us. We'll be spending some time there today looking at our different settings, but you can definitely go there to, again, look at settings, schedule meetings, or download the Zoom application if you have not done that already. Okay, so let's switch gears and let's look at some of our Zoom settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to our Zoom desktop application. Now, part of our meeting, a large part of our meeting is about user management, and another part is about security. So user management and security, a lot of that gets done before your meeting actually starts. Part of what you can do to help manage users and to set up secure meetings is to schedule meetings a certain way. So we're going to look at scheduling meetings and some of those settings that you can take advantage of that are going to help you with user management and also security. Let me move these Zoom controls so we can see. All right, so this screen that we're looking at now, this is our kind of our home screen on our Zoom desktop application. So hopefully this looks familiar to everyone, but if it doesn't, you can definitely download it from tcu.zoom.us and you can use the Zoom desktop application. So we're gonna look at scheduling because again, that is where a lot of the work gets done before you're even on the Zoom call. You can make things easier for yourself by how you choose to schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and click on schedule so we can take a look at some of these settings that are going to help us with user management and security. All right, so we have our schedule meeting open here. We're not going to go through all of the aspects of scheduling a meeting. If you do have questions about scheduling, be sure to take a look at our Zoom basics training on IT's Zoom website because we do talk about different things like recurring meetings and meeting IDs there. We're not going to talk about that part today because we are going to focus on security and user management for this portion. All right, but a lot of it is intermingled. So the first thing we get to that has to do with our topics today is this meeting ID. I personally recommend using this generate automatically option. You're going to get a brand new fresh meeting ID each time. You don't have to worry about, using the same one over and over again that maybe other people would know. No confusion between classes using the same meeting ID. So I don't recommend using that personal meeting ID for regularly scheduled meetings. Generate automatically will give you a fresh meeting ID each time. So I personally like that one. The next option you get to is require a meeting password. So this, again, totally up to you, but it is an extra layer of security. And in fact, because Zoom has really started focusing on security, if you schedule a meeting that doesn't have a password or a waiting room, you're actually going to get, I can't remember the symbol, it might be like a red exclamation point, telling you that you don't have either of these added to your meeting. So adding a password, you can check this box and it will give you a automatically generated password. So I didn't create that, it just popped up when I checked the box. So that's one option. Or you can type in your own password. So if you want to type in something else, you can do that. Chances are their passwords are probably more secure than what you're going to come up with, unless you actually add a really, a really secure alphanumeric passcode. Up to you. I'm just going to check and uncheck that again, and it generates a new password for me. If you do add a password, make sure that your participants are given the password because they will need it in order to join the meeting. So that's the only additional caveat there. Make sure people have the password. Now, passwords are good. I personally think that there are some other security features that are a little bit more effective. And the reason I say that is because the password is only as secure as people keep it. So one of the reasons that we have all of these added security features, it has to do with Zoom bombing. So maybe you've heard of Zoom bombing, maybe you haven't, and I don't want to scare anyone. So what Zoom bombing is, it's when someone who is not supposed to be on your meeting joins your meeting. And if you're wondering, well, how does that happen? How would a random person join my meeting? If they were given the link, if they were given the meeting ID, if they're just really bored in quarantine and they're typing in random meeting IDs until they happen upon one, those are some different ways that people can get into meetings. So these additional security features are going to help prevent that. So passwords are good. Unless you have a student that goes and posts the password somewhere or gives it to one of their friends. So the password is only as secure as people keep it. You can't really control if people are sharing it where they're not supposed to be. So it's an extra layer, but it's not a end-all be-all security measure. We're going to talk about some other features that might help a little bit more. The video part, that doesn't necessarily play into our security, so we're going to skip that for now. What we really want to look at is some of our advanced options. Okay, so in our advanced options, enable waiting room. This is a really good security feature, and it kind of is the end all be all. So the waiting room, what it does is it allows you to basically put people in a meeting before the meeting. It's not a true meeting, it's just kind of like a virtual lobby. So people have to wait there until they're let into the meeting. So by doing that, and we did that today, so before you guys got into this call, you probably got a message that said, the host will let you in shortly, something along those lines. And by doing that, either myself as the host or one of my co-hosts, so in this case, Dwayne, he was actually responsible for letting everyone into the meeting. That way, if you're the host and you have a waiting room set up, people aren't just getting into your call. You are actually having to admit people into the call. We're going to look at waiting rooms a little bit more after we get through the rest of these settings, because there are some different settings in the web portal that will affect how the waiting room works. You have some different options, so I want to make sure that you know how to change that so that it's going to work how you expect it to. You can choose whether or not everyone gets put into the waiting room, or there's also an option where people who have logged in with TCU accounts don't get put into the waiting room. They're automatically let into the meeting. So it just depends on what you want to do. So we're going to talk about waiting rooms some more, but this is a really good feature. The one downside I would say is that if people are joining your meeting late, if everyone doesn't join on time, you do kind of have to keep an eye on that, or you would need to designate a co-host to keep an eye on that, because if you're not looking, like for example, right now, I can't see my participants. So if someone joined the meeting right now, I wouldn't know and I wouldn't be able to let them in. That's why I have Dwayne as my co-host who's watching that, and he can let people into the meeting as they need to. So just something to consider. Enable join before host. I personally recommend turning this off. This allows people to join the meeting before you, the host, arrives. So you don't really need people to be joining your call before you get there. If you uncheck that, it'll basically just say, the meeting will begin shortly, and then people will join the meeting after you do. All right. So this next one, this isn't really security, but it is a user management feature. So this one allows you to mute participants upon entry. So what that does is as your participants join the call, it automatically mutes their microphone. And the reason that's beneficial is because it's efficient. If you have a big call with maybe 50 people and everyone joins and everyone's microphone is turned on, you're going to get a lot of noise. You're not going to know who's actually trying to talk or who has the barking dog in the background. And you're going to have to go through and figure that out and mute everyone. So from the get-go, if you just set it up so that all of your participants are muted, it'll just help your meeting get off to a smooth start. Participants are able to unmute themselves. So like I said, we'll have time for questions and you guys can unmute yourselves then. That's completely fine. But mute participants upon entry, I think it just is helpful for some of your user management as you start. All right, this next feature, only authenticated users can join. And then you'll see next to it, for me, it says only TCU users. So I personally think this is another good option for security, but there are also a couple of caveats. So what this does is when you have this one checked, only authenticated users can join. We used that setting for this meeting today. So what that does is only people who are logged in with their TCU credentials can join the meeting. Now, for us, that's a benefit because we want people to be using their TCU credentials for several reasons. IT is paying for everyone to have one of these pro accounts, so we get a lot of extra features that you don't get with the basic unpaid accounts. And if you're not using your TCU credentials, you're not logging in, you're not getting those extra benefits. So that's one reason. But another reason is security. You don't want a random person outside of TCU joining your meeting who's not supposed to be there. So this way people are having to log in with their TCU credentials. Another benefit of that is if you are a professor and you plan on taking attendance in Zoom, by people using their TCU credentials to log in, when you get those reports for attendance, it's going to have their name and it's going to be their name as it's listed across all of the TCU platforms. If people aren't logging in, it might say guest, it could say iPad. If they've joined from an iPad, they can change their name potentially based on some of your settings to make it say whatever they want. So again, it's user management, it's also security. So I recommend using that. The only reason that I would say not to use that is if you are planning on having a guest. So if you have like a guest coming to speak from one of your classes and they are outside of TCU, then you wouldn't want to use that for that particular meeting. But if you're not going to use that, I would say definitely enable the waiting room or use both. Today we've used both for this meeting because we posted this meeting information on IT's website so that everyone here could find it, but that also means it was just kind of out in the open. So we want to make sure only the correct people are joining the meeting. So by enabling the waiting room and using that only authenticated users can join feature, we were able to do that. So when you check these options, I'm going to go ahead and just check a couple of them. That way for this meeting that I'm creating, we're going to call it our test secure meeting. By doing that, when I schedule it, I already have those options in place. So I don't have to worry about making sure it's secure when I'm starting the call or joining in. I don't have to worry about muting people. It's already been done ahead of time. So that is definitely something I recommend that will help you with security and also user management a little bit. All right, just to keep going with a couple of those things that we have started talking about, I'm going to switch us over to the web portal. So we're going to look at the web portal so that we can continue looking at some of those features that we just talked about. All right, so again, the web portal, if you haven't been there before, it is tcu.zoom.us, and it looks like this. We are going to go into our settings, and you are going to be prompted to log in with your TCU credentials. All right, perfect. So when you go into settings, it automatically brings you into the settings sections. And the first thing that you get to is security. So let's take a look at a little bit of this. We won't go through all of it, But the waiting room, so this is what we were just talking about. So when participants join a meeting, it places them in a waiting room and requires the host to admit them individually, enabling the waiting room automatically disables the setting for allowing participants to join before the host. So that makes sense, right? Participants can't join before the host if the host is having to let them into the meeting. So having this on, having a waiting room enabled will kind of do two things at once. Again, you just need to make sure that you are keeping an eye on that and admitting people if they join late. So here are some waiting room options, and it is really important that you've checked what your options are set to if you plan to start using the waiting room. So for me, I actually had to change this. This was not the default on my account. So you can see right now that my option is that everyone will go into the waiting room. I'm going to click edit options so you can see some of the other choices. So this one would be users not in your account or users who are not in your account and are not part of the allowed domains. So users not in your account, this would be people who don't have that like at tcu.edu. So basically, the way that this was set for me, I actually ran into this. It was a learning experience maybe a month ago when we were doing some different Zoom sessions. Is I had the waiting room turned on, but I didn't have it set so that everyone would go to the waiting room. It was set so users not in my account would go to the waiting room, which means that users who are in my account don't go in the waiting room. So I wanted to have everyone in the waiting room, but what actually happened was as soon as I started the call, everyone who had logged in with their TCU credentials was automatically admitted into the meeting and they weren't placed in the waiting room. So that might be what you want, but it might not be. For me, I want everyone to be in the waiting room. If you do want to use it just for security and you feel comfortable allowing everyone with TCU accounts to go in automatically, you could choose one of these other options. This one here that says users who are not in your account and not part of the allowed domains, that ties into that authenticated users only. So you could see on mine that it was set to TCU. You can add additional domains. So if you had someone from a specific company joining as like a guest to come talk to your class about maybe their field of expertise or something like that, you could add an additional domain potentially if you wanted to. All right. So again, just take a look at those options if you do plan on using the waiting room. All right. These are just some additional options about requiring passcodes. If you're going to require passcodes for people on the phone, you can look through that if you'd like. This is the only authenticated users can join meetings. So again, if you don't see that as an option at all, you can toggle it on. This doesn't mean that it's going to be on for all of your meetings. As you saw when we scheduled, I had to check a checkbox. So it's just giving you that option. Here you can see only TCU users. This is the default, but like I was saying a second ago, if you needed to add other domains, you could edit it. Just be careful that you're not adding a generic one like Gmail, because then anyone with a Gmail account can join your call, and that kind of defeats the purpose of using this setting, right? Okay, so those are some of our settings there. One last note about the waiting room. I'm going to switch us back to that PowerPoint presentation so that you can see the picture that I had. Because if you haven't used a waiting room before, you probably have questions like, well, how do I admit people? I unfortunately don't have a way to show you that when I don't have people in a waiting room right now. So this was from our meeting yesterday. I took a screenshot of it. So you guys were all placed in a waiting room before you got on the call today. So you just saw that you were waiting. On our end, for either the host or the co-host, this is what it looks like. So one of your Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen is your participants window. So it shows up in your participants and it'll show you, hey, there are 2 people waiting. So you have a couple of options. If I say, oh, okay, I just actually want Susan in the call right now, you can just admit one person. So for example, I did that today with Dwayne. I wanted Dwayne to get in the call so that I could make him a co-host and talk about some stuff with him, but I didn't want anyone else in the meeting yet because I didn't want them to be a part of that conversation, preparing and things like that. So you can admit one person, but you don't have to only admit individuals. So if you're about to start a class and you have 30 students waiting, you don't want to have to click admit, admit, admit 30 times. You do have this admit all button. So again, if you just take a look through your participants, make sure it's all people who are supposed to be on your call. If it looks good, you can hit admit all, and that'll put everyone in to your meeting. If people join late, you'll get a little pop-up above where it says participants in your Zoom control, and it'll show you who's trying to join the meeting, and you can admit them that way. You'll still have that admit all feature that doesn't go away. So if you have like 3 people who are joining late, you can admit them all. You also have the choice to message everyone. So if you have a lot of people in your waiting room and maybe you're actually going to start 5 minutes late and you just want to let everyone know, you can use that message button right there, and you can send a message to everyone who is in the waiting room and say, hey, we're running 5 minutes late. We'll let you all in shortly. So that is how the waiting room will actually look. Okay, so we've talked a little bit now about just some of the things that you can do to prepare ahead of time when it comes to scheduling to help you with security and a little bit of user management. We're going to also look at those features in terms of the actual Zoom call and in our Zoom controls, but I do want to pause before we switch gears and just see what questions you guys have so far. So I'm going to go back to our Zoom call here, and I'll stop sharing my screen for just a minute. All right, what questions do we have so far? Again, please feel free to unmute your microphone.
Hey, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a question regarding office hours and Zoom. Would you like to go over that?
Okay, so office hours in Zoom, and everyone might do this a little bit differently. So a lot of people have wanted to do sort of office hours within Zoom. So what you can do is you can create a meeting. Maybe you're going to have office hours on Tuesday from 2 to 4. So you create a meeting for Tuesday from 2 to 4, and you add a waiting room. So then you join when you're ready. And what's really nice is the waiting room, it keeps your participants in the order that they joined. So if you want to make sure that you're taking people on a first come, first serve basis, you as the host, when you look at your participants and you'll see the waiting room, the person who's at the top joined first and they've been waiting the longest. So let me put up that PowerPoint slide again, because that might make more sense. Let me share this one more time. All right, let's put up the PowerPoint. So in this one, for example, 2 people waiting. So in this case, Justine, she would have been there before Susan. So if you say, okay, I want to let Justine in, you can admit Justine and keep Susan waiting. And then you have your office hours with Justine, and then she leaves the call. And then you go, okay, who's next? So now Susan would be at the top and someone else would be listed behind her. You can admit Susan, have your meeting with Susan. She leaves, you admit the next person, so on and so forth. And you can take advantage of that message feature again to kind of let people know, like, hey, we're just going through the list, hang tight. So that would be kind of the best way that you could utilize Zoom for office hours and using that waiting room feature. What other questions do we have so far? All right, well, we will keep going then. All righty, so I'm going to share my screen with you guys again. Let's do this. Okay. So I am sharing my screen. So we're going to talk about some different options for user management within the actual Zoom call itself. So now we're in our call. This is what your call would look like. What are some
follow-up question before we move on
Yeah,
office?
of course.
Thank you. So if I have set up the office hour and let's say on 2 p.m. on Tuesday, I have my office hour, then I have to go to the option of start a meeting. So I'm available on Zoom for my students, or I don't do anything because I've created it and automatically it's going to pop out.
You have to start the meeting. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You do have to start it. Yeah, your meetings won't start automatically, which is kind of the nice thing about Zoom. So if you have a meeting scheduled at 2, but you decide to actually start it at 1:30, you can start it early, you can start it late. It's just completely on you to start the meeting.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. All right, good questions. Okay, so our Zoom controls, different options here. Again, it's kind of mixed in terms of security and user management. So we'll just kind of go through, it'll be mixed in together. We'll get through all of this stuff and then we'll look at joining from a second device. So options that you have here. Your mute and your video, that's going to be for you, so that won't really affect your users particularly. So the first feature that we get to here that falls in line with security and user management is going to be this security shield right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that so we see our options. Okay, so we have different choices here. So this one, we already had our waiting room enabled, so that's turned on. Lock meeting prevents more people from joining the meeting. By default now, and this is another feature that has changed due to security, so if you started using this in March and you haven't really used it much since, some of this may be different. Participants can't share their screen by default. So if one of you wanted to share, say, a PowerPoint presentation on our call right now, you wouldn't be able to yet. But if I wanted participants to share a screen, if you have students that are going to be doing presentations, you can check this and say, allow participants to share screen. And then your participants would be able to share their screen. Again, chat, we do have chat enabled. So chat's enabled, participants can chat, but if you'll remember from the web portal earlier, they can't send one-on-one messages. They can send a message to everyone, or they can send a message to an individual, but not a private message to one another. This is another option that you may or may not allow your participants to do. Rename themselves. So if someone wants to give themselves a goofy nickname and think that they can then, interfere with the call and that you won't know who they are, someone could rename themselves. But the good thing is, as long as people are logging in with their TCU credentials, when you go to generate a report later, if someone does change their name, if they rename themselves, you will actually still see their TCU name and email in your report, and then you'll see the name that they gave themselves. So you'll be able to tell. There are good reasons to rename yourself as well. I don't want to make it seem like there are only, negative reasons for renaming yourself. For example, we'll see this later when we join with a second device. If I'm going to join a call with a second device, I might want to rename myself so that I can differentiate between which device is which of my own. Once we get through these, I will show you how you can rename yourself. Okay, and actually I'm going to give you guys that ability so that when we get there, you can play with it if you want to. Okay, this one, so allowing participants to unmute themselves. Again, completely up to you, but for me personally, since I start my meetings by having everyone muted, I like participants to have the option to unmute themselves so that they can ask questions. Now, if you are maybe doing something and you're like, I don't want anyone to ask questions, I don't want to hear anyone's microphones, I just don't want that, you can uncheck that option by clicking on it. So now you guys don't have the option to unmute yourselves. You can turn it on and off though. So if there's a certain part where you don't want anyone to unmute themselves, but then there's a time for questions and you do, you just check it again. Now, every time you click to check, the pop-up window goes away. So you just have to click the security button again, but no big deal. Annotate on shared content. This would be if you want people to be able to like draw and do annotations on something that you're sharing. So up to you if you want that or not. You also have the option to remove a participant. So maybe you admitted someone from the waiting room and they shouldn't have been in the call. You can actually remove people. So when you click on that, this will show everyone in the call. And I can say, oh, Cheryl's being a real troublemaker again, and I can just remove her. Of course, that's not the case, so we'll just cancel that, but you can remove people that way if you need to. All right. So those are some of our security options that we have there. The next thing that we have in terms of user management is our participants list. So let's bring this up. I'm going to make this bigger. So your participants list, this will show you everyone that is on the call. So you can go through and you can look, you can search for people if you need to. And this is where you can assign some of those additional controls. For example, co-host. If I want to make Audrey the co-host, I can just hover over her name and participants, and I can go to this button that says more, and I can say make co-host. Now, the reason that you might make someone a co-host is because it does allow them some of the controls that the host would have. So like we were talking about with the waiting room, if I know that I'm not going to be able to see the waiting room, I don't have this screen up, I'm looking at a PowerPoint, giving someone else the ability to be the co-host will allow them to admit people from the waiting room for you. And you'll see there are some other options here too. So if you needed them to stop their video, you can do that. Spotlight video, what that does is it makes it so that this person's video is what everyone is seeing. So right now, for example, I'm going to close this, we'll come back to it. But you'll see at the top left of my screen, it says cancel the spotlight video. That's because I have my video set to spotlight right now, which means that all of you are basically forced to look at my video. Now, in a class setting, if you're lecturing, you're the professor, you might want to spotlight your video. The reason for that is if someone does unmute their microphone, it might change real quick and go to a different person, and it might be something other than what you want. So you might choose to spotlight yourself, you might choose to spotlight the classroom so that everyone's video is set to you. But you also have some other options as individuals. So I am going to cancel my spotlight for a second. I'm going to cancel this. So it went to Dwayne. So we'll pretend that I wanted to keep my screen on Dwayne's video. So as the participant, I'm going to go back to my participants list. And if I say, yep, I just want to keep this, this is the most important, I can go to more. And, oh, actually, that didn't do it. Where is my pin option? Let me change my view. So up in the right-hand corner here, you have options for gallery view or speaker view. So just to switch back and forth so you get an idea. Gallery view will show you a lot of your participants at one time, potentially up to 49, but it does depend on your computer and what you have the ability to do. The reason I've switched to this is because I didn't see all of my options. So let's say that I'm going to pick on Audrey again. If I want to show Audrey's video just for myself, so this is just you as a participant. This doesn't have to do with being the host. If you're a student in a class and you're like, oh, I need to watch Audrey's window, that is where the information is coming from. When I hover over this thumbnail of Audrey's window, I have these 3 dots that show up right here, and I click on them, and I have an option to pin. I should have an option to pin the video. Where is it? I'm curious. I'm wondering if you guys try to do the exact same thing. Do you guys have the option to pin a video? I am not sure why I don't see that option right now. Okay, Audrey's saying yes. Maybe because I'm the host, maybe because I had something spotlighted, or because I'm the prominent video, I can't pin one, but Audrey's saying that yes, she can. So if you guys do the same thing, if you hover over a thumbnail and you click the 3 dots, you should see an option to pin the video. Now with that done, yeah.
On your own gallery and not the thumbnail that's on the shared screen.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So pinning the video allows you to make a video kind of stay. So if you're on like active speaker view, it can switch based on who's talking. But if you want to keep a video up, you can click pin video. Again, I don't see that option right now, but you guys should have that. So you can pin a video. Now the difference between pinning and spotlighting. Pinning is on a user by user basis. So Audrey can have one video pinned, Cheryl can have a different video pinned, Dwayne can have another video pinned, and they can all have different videos pinned. They're the only one that's affected by that pinning. That is just for you and your personal preference and what you need to see. No one else knows what you have pinned. It doesn't affect anyone else's screen. It is just for you. Spotlighting, on the other hand, you guys can't spotlight a video. Only the host can spotlight a video. And what it does, it has a similar functionality to pinning a video, but it makes it so that everyone is spotlighted on that video. So pinning, your personal preference, no one else sees it. You as the participant can pin what you want. Spotlight, controlled by the host, and they choose whose video is spotlighted for everyone. Does that make sense? All right, perfect. So again, you have some different options here. Oh, great question. Someone said, can you spotlight more than one person? No, you cannot. So only one person, one window can be spotlighted at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back. So again, this is gallery view. So it shows all of our different people, but it does show a yellow box around me, and that's because I am the person who is actively speaking right now. If someone else started talking, the yellow box would go around them. But again, the view only changes for me. The reason that you're seeing my view is because I'm sharing my screen and you're watching my shared screen. But you can change between speaker and gallery view depending on your preference. If you're in a classroom teaching, you might want it on gallery view so that you can see your students, but that doesn't change what they see. The only way to change what they see is by choosing to spotlight a certain video. So now I'm spotlighting my video again, so everyone has to watch my video.
May I ask a question that is relevant here? If I am using a PowerPoint during the Zoom session, and I see my students on a column to the right as we are on, and a student is speaking, and I want to know who, and somewhat they're not highlighted. I don't want to go to gallery view because that goes the entire PowerPoint. How do I do that to make sure that I know who's speaking? So
yeah, that's a great question. So it kind of depends. So in theory, if you're not on gallery view, if you're on active speaker view, it should make them one of the boxes that you're seeing. It's not always perfect, but it should automatically switch. But if you are doing a PowerPoint that's taking up, the most real estate on your screen, unfortunately, you can't see everyone that's there. So it's possible that if it's not working properly and it didn't switch to that active speaker view, you may not be able to see them. If you have the ability to use either a second device or you have dual monitors, you could put your PowerPoint on one display and you can put your Zoom call in another and maybe have that up on gallery view so that you see both on separate screens. But unfortunately, you are somewhat limited when you are using one display because you just don't have that much screen real estate. So it does, like you said, show up on the side. And it should switch if you're on active speaker view, but it's not perfect.
another question that I have, if I want all of my classes to be recorded, is there an option that automatically it would do it and I won't have to do manually every time?
Sure. So that we do. So yesterday, our webinar on recording, we do talk about all of our different options for that, but I'll show you real quick. If anyone else is wondering about this, what you can do is in your meetings, it's in those settings that we looked at a little bit earlier. You can either edit an existing meeting. So if you've already set them up, you can edit it. Or for a new meeting, I'm just going to click schedule. When you go to schedule it, or if you're editing it, you can go into advanced options and it'll say automatically record the meeting. And you can check that. And then you just choose if you're recording it locally or in the cloud. We go into a lot of depth on that in the session we did yesterday. And we will be posting all of the sessions that we did this week, probably sometime within the next week. They do have to get edited and uploaded, so it takes a little bit of time. But within the next week, all of the sessions should be up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
We did have a question regarding co-host and setting it up beforehand. Does that fall into the alternative host?
Yeah. Great question. So it comes down to what do we mean? What does Zoom call it? Let's see, stop sharing for just a sec so we can just talk. So in terms of co-host versus alternative host, let me bring the participants window back up and I will actually share my screen again. Perfect. Okay, so co-host. Zoom has two different options, co-host and alternative host. To make someone a co-host, you can't do that before the meeting starts. You have to do it during the actual meeting. You can't do it ahead of time. There is an option to assign someone as an alternative host, and that gets set up in that same section we just looked at for the recording. It's just an option in there that says add an alternative host. So that would be more like if you needed someone else to start the meeting for you, or you wanted someone else to take over host controls. Most of the time I don't use that one. It exists, but it's called alternative host. So for a co-host, that has to be done during the meeting. It cannot be done ahead of time. All right, so just for the sake of time, we're going to keep going again. We'll pause for questions at the end, but I do want to come back to our participants window, because again, for managing participants, this is where we can, again, view people. It's where our waiting room would show up. We also have some different options here. So for example, I have this mute all button. So if maybe you forgot to mute everyone at the beginning and you wanted to mute everyone now, you can press this mute all and it will mute all of your participants. You can also unmute people. So as the host here, you can say ask to unmute. Now it won't unmute them automatically. I believe they'll get a message asking them to unmute and they'll have to agree to that. So just some different options there. Okay, renaming. So this one, as the host, I can rename other people, but for you guys, what you might want to do at some point is rename yourself. So if you ever had a need to do that, you'll see why that might be important when we look at adding a second device. But you can hover over your name and you can say more, and you can say rename, and you can type a new name for yourself. So that is one of the ways that you can do that. Again, mute. Participants, so you guys have some options too if you go into your participants window. So you can use this, you can encourage your participants to use this. I don't have it since I'm the host, but you guys have a little button that says raise hand. Feel free to click on any of these. You have yes, no, go slower, go faster. So you can encourage your students to actually use these and click on them. Again, feel free to click on them if you like to try it out. It won't hurt anything, but you can see it as the host. So if, maybe you ask a question, you say, does everyone understand? Or are you done with the activity? People can actually say like, yes or no, and you'll see it pop up next to their name. So by my name right now, you can see that red X, and then you can clear it. After you've gotten all your responses, you can say clear all. So that's another way that you can interact with your participants. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. So we looked a little bit at our gallery view and our active speaker view and how that switches. I want to show you one other setting, and then we're going to talk about adding a second device because we get a lot of questions about that. So let me show you one other thing here. So this is our main Zoom, our home screen on the desktop application. I'm going to go into the settings, which is this gray gear icon on the right-hand side. Let me find what I'm looking for. Okay, so if you are trying to see more people in gallery view, if you're not seeing enough people, in your video settings, under meetings, the very last option here, it says display up to 49 participants per screen in gallery view. So this will give you the option to see more people. However, it does depend on your computer. So if your computer doesn't meet the basic requirements that Zoom has, this might be grayed out for you. So it's possible that you won't be able to see that. But there are some other options on here. But that is how you can see the most people in gallery view, but the most will be 49. Alrighty. So let's talk, I'm going to stop sharing again. Let's talk about how you can join from a second device and also why you would want to join from a second device. So there could be lots of reasons. The one that we get questions about most frequently right now is people who are teaching on campus. So if you are teaching on campus, you know that in order to use the cameras and microphones that are in the classroom, you have to start your Zoom session from the teacher station. But a lot of people say, well, okay, I understand that I have to run the Zoom session from the teacher station to use the camera and the microphones, but what if I have a PowerPoint on my laptop and I want to be able to run that PowerPoint, or I want to be able to show something that's on another device? Okay, so with Zoom, you can technically only be logged into Zoom on one device, right? You can technically only be logged into Zoom on one device. So I'm a teacher, I'm in the classroom, I log into Zoom on the teacher station to start my meeting, but now I need to join Zoom from my laptop or from my iPad or from my phone. What can I do? Okay, so there are a couple of ways to join from a second device. Now, I can't show you live because I wouldn't be able to share my screen until I've joined the meeting. So I actually created a video that shows this process. It's only about maybe a minute and a half. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to play that video for you guys so that you can see the process of how to join from a second device. And then we'll pause for questions, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Quick note about just screen sharing as a good reminder, make sure that, here, let me share real quick. When you go to share your screen, if you are going to play a video, make sure that you check these boxes at the bottom so that you're sharing your computer sound and that you're optimizing your share for video clips. So I've done that. Okay, let me pull up the video.
Let's take a look at how we can join a Zoom session that is currently running from a second device. The first step is to make sure you know the meeting ID. You can find the meeting ID by looking at your Zoom window from your current meeting and clicking on the eye in the top left corner. Now that you have the meeting ID, you can go to your second device. From your second device, open the Zoom desktop application. When given the option to either join a meeting or sign in, choose Join a Meeting. Then enter the meeting ID. Below, you'll have the option to enter a different display name, and you'll see a few checkboxes which you can select or deselect based on your preferences. After making your changes, click Join. Please note that if you are joining a meeting that has been set up to only allow authenticated users to join, you will not be able to join this way and you will need to sign in. It's also possible that your computer will automatically sign you in, so let's take a look at what happens in either of those scenarios. Whether or not you've signed in or you've been signed in automatically, you'll arrive at the Zoom home screen. Click on the option that says Join. Once again, you'll enter the meeting ID, change your display name if necessary, and make any changes to the checkbox selections you desire. Then press Join. When you press Join on your second device, you will see a message on the first device you joined from telling you that you have been signed out. This is because you can only be signed into Zoom on one device at a time. However, this will not affect your meeting in any way. Simply press OK and close out of the window that says Sign In. Your meeting will continue to run normally.
That's how you can join from more than one device. If you do have to log in, or if it logs you in automatically, you will get a pop-up on the teacher station or wherever you signed in first, and it'll tell you that you've been logged out, but it doesn't actually affect the call. You can keep going and it's fine. So that's why it's handy to be able to rename yourself, because if you notice in that video, my name was the same on both of my devices. I think it just said like Lauren Kaiser's something. Then it can be really confusing when you go and you look at your participants and it just says your name twice and you don't know which one is the teacher station and you don't know which one is your computer. So then when you want to go share your screen, you don't know if you're sharing your screen from the teacher station or from your computer. So what I do is I usually, with my second device, I'll name it ahead of time. Like you saw, you can type in the name. So I'll name it like Lauren's laptop. That way I know this is the one I need to share my screen from. Or if you've forgotten to do that, you can go onto your participants. Let me share my screen again. You can go into your participants, find yourself, and rename it so that you know, okay, this is the teacher station. And you could name it. You could name it teacher station if you wanted to. So it didn't have your name, teacher station, Lauren's laptop. And that way you know exactly which device is which, so that when you go to share your screen, easy, you don't have to think about which device is what. So that's going to be the easiest way that you can join from a second device. So what questions do you guys have? We've talked a bit about user management, security, and joining from a second device. We have just a few minutes. So what questions have we not answered for you?
Lauren, I did want to bring up the fact of the feedback.
Thank you. Yes, I knew I was going to forget to mention that. Okay, Dwayne brings up an excellent point. It is about joining from a second device. If you're in a classroom, so if you're teaching on campus, you're in a classroom, you're using the cameras and microphones in the classroom. If you join with a second device, if you join from your laptop, you have to mute yourself in the Zoom call. So you have to mute yourself using that little mute icon to mute your Zoom call. But not only do you have to do that, you also need to mute your computer itself or your iPad itself or your phone itself. Because if you don't do that, you're going to get really bad feedback because you have this microphone in the classroom and then you have a microphone and speaker on your laptop, and the sound just gets in this feedback loop and it sounds really bad. So the only device in a classroom that should have sound should be the teacher station and the microphone. You don't need to have anyone else who's in your classroom. They need to be muted on the Zoom call. Their device needs to be muted. That is so important. Thank you, Dwayne. Yeah. All right, now what questions do we have?
We did have a question regarding the best way to manage a panel of speakers.
So, okay, this is another thing where Zoom has a word for it and we all kind of, colloquially maybe use a word for it. So if you're truly doing a panel, then that is actually different than a Zoom meeting, and you would have a webinar license and you would be doing a panel and they would have different options and different controls, which we won't be talking about. But if you are using a meeting like this and you are trying to kind of do a panel within a regular meeting, it's really going to come down to going into your participants list and making sure that the right people have their cameras turned on, the right people have their cameras turned off, and muting and unmuting people at the correct times, so that you'll have to have like a host or maybe even a co-host. You can have a couple co-hosts, you can have multiple. Oh, sorry, I didn't share my screen for that. Let me share again. Yeah, in your participants, using your participants window to turn people's cameras on or off. You can't actually turn people's cameras on. They would have to do it. It would send them like a request to turn it on. But yeah, have a host, have a co-host, have a couple co-hosts, and have people monitoring that to turn people's cameras and microphones on and off, depending on who should be speaking. And then also using that spotlight feature to spotlight the correct panelists so that they're showing to everyone. So it's a mix of those things. If you are truly going to be doing a lot of panels and things like that, you might want to look into getting a webinar license. All right, what other questions do you guys have? Again, please feel free to unmute yourselves if you like. Okay, we'll go ahead and end it. Thank you guys so much for attending. Please have a great weekend coming up and a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.